Nearly 2/3 of Canadian adults have experienced at least one potentially traumatic event in their lives. Trauma could come from personal loss, accidents, life-threatening illness, violence, or sudden tragedy, just to name a few. On average, about 8% of Canadian adults report moderate to severe symptoms of trauma or post-traumatic stress disorder within the last month alone. But that percentage rises among women, young adults, and frontline workers. Trauma's ripple effects are far-reaching, impacting families, workplaces, and entire communities. Welcome to Beyond the Surface. I'm so glad you could join us for today's episode. And today we have a guest that you might already recognize. Welcome, Dr. Daniel Saugh. It's so good to have you back.
Thank you, Rebecca. It's a pleasure to be here again.
And today we're going to talk about trauma, but before we dive in, we're going to watch a story of someone who's experienced trauma. So let's watch it together, sure. And I want to watch it with you too.
The flashbacks keep coming. It's been several weeks since my car accident, but it feels like yesterday. I keep reliving every moment, every detail. I even dream about them. That is, when I have dreams. It's been very hard to sleep. I feel like I've lived through the crash dozens of times, over and over. I don't trust myself to drive anymore. Even though the final report said it wasn't my fault, I can't help but feel like it was. I must have missed something. There must have been something I didn't catch in time, something I didn't do in time. Some way I could have prevented us from being smashed and nearly killed. It's not safe for me to be behind the wheel. But even being a passenger is so hard. I catch myself bracing for impact. Every little car noise sets me off. My heart races, my body is so stiff. I scan the road and the mirrors, even though I'm not driving. Sometimes, though, I zone out completely, just so that I could cope with the ride. When that happens, nothing feels real. And whenever I need to go past the place where it happened, I have to close my eyes and hold my breath.
Welcome back. So today we're talking about trauma, right, Dr. Daniel? And I know that for this person we saw, they experienced a car accident and now they're experiencing they're having traumatic experiences from it. They're experiencing some sorts of symptoms. So how does trauma impact someone's life?
Oh, that's a loaded question. Where do we begin? Well, trauma is, this psychological and emotional, response to a deeply distressing and disturbing event or experience. So the like of which that we just saw and heard. And so that person's life has changed dramatically. I often remember hearing this from a mentor and reading this in a textbook, but it's almost like this. When someone has a normal experience, everything seems to be going well. And then what I call a TE or traumatic event or experience that comes in or affects or disrupts the normal, that normal moves to abnormal. And then in that abnormal state, it's deeply distressing, disturbing, disorienting, and everybody wants to return back to the original normal, but you can't get back there because that original normal is disturbed. So now in this abnormal state, you have to seek to embrace a new normal.
That sounds hard.
It's hard, but that's the only way. It's almost like a one-directional arrow. People want to go back the other way, but it's going this way. And so it takes a long time to deal with a traumatic event or experience because it has significantly adversely impacted someone's life, but almost like uprooted their lives, changed the course of direction. It's like mixing it up. It's almost like shaking the dice. It is really, they're shaken to the core.
So for this narrative we watched, it was a car accident.
Yes.
What could be traumatic? Like, can you give definite, like, what would be
Sure.
examples of traumatic events maybe?
Yes. So what happens in a car accident is that now there's these symptoms, these psychosomatic reactions taking place. Your body tenses up, right? Then you get apprehensive. There can also be a touch of anxiety as well, right? So in that accident, now someone might develop a fear or a phobia for driving or driving at a certain time or driving on the highway, or that particular place where that accident occurred can leave a traumatic memory.
That's incredible, because it's not because you recover physically that you overcame everything related to the accident. There are
That's right.
implications.
That's right, 100%. And so I would say trauma it's complicated. It's layered. It's like an onion, peeling an onion to get to the core, to the middle part of it.
And I understand that a person may suffer an accident and not have trauma from it, and a person may suffer an accident and have trauma from it.
From it.
What would be? Can you tell me what is different for each one of them?
So a person who has the accident and they suffered trauma.
And they have the symptoms of trauma that you mentioned, but there are other
Yes.
people who just it
Right.
happened.
They walk away. Yeah. So again, it's dealing with going back to someone's orientation, so their internal capacity and resources. So some people have learned, and we'll probably discuss this subsequently, but just to make a reference to it, some people have stronger internal resources. We would refer to that also as resilience, and also support systems around them. So the person who has less of those are more likely to be reactive to the trauma, to actually, the trauma becomes much more, shall we say, insidious and very harmful to them, right? So I would say that the trauma leaves a scar, like a psychological scar, and it can be ingrained in the mind. And then for someone who can walk away, but I think that no one walks away 100% unscathed. There's always some type of trauma. So here's the difference. Someone could go through a traumatic experience, but they don't necessarily have to always be traumatized.
Oh, interesting.
So I've been through, and you've probably been through, many traumatic events or experiences, but not every one of them has traumatized us. I think the ones that overwhelm us, that exceed our capacity to cope, the ones that simply disrupt and just completely disturb our lives, those are the ones I think and I sense, according to research and by experience, and what I've read, is the ones that remain or retain as traumatic experiences that can now be triggered if it happens again, and someone can become re-traumatized.
That's very interesting. So let's say, for instance, for this person was the car accident, but like I know abuse might be sources of trauma. What other sources of trauma?
Thank you for bringing that up. So abuse is definitely one of them. And that is a loaded one, because there's all types of abuse, right? There's physical abuse, verbal abuse, sexual abuse, right? Financial abuse, and there's others to it. So abuse in and of itself, big category. Then abandonment, then also witnessing a traumatic event or experience or atrocity in someone's life, which of course we can refer to later on, but to quickly reference it, a quick touch point is someone might experience what we call a PTSD, a post-traumatic stress disorder, right? So I think that there are different precipitants that can cause or give way to, or the onset development of trauma.
That's interesting. It could be a variety of situations.
I believe so. Plethora, multiplicity, right? And I would say that any situation that is, of course, highly stressful, and I would say, really, shakes us at the foundation, where it breaks the norm. So we kind of get derailed. And then, of course, again, I go back to the psychological and emotional disturbance. That's where the trauma really hits someone. And so it kind of destabilizes them, and they are not able to cope in a normal way.
That's interesting. We hear a lot of the word triggers, right? What would be triggers in the context of trauma?
Yes, so triggers. There are many, I would say, triggers such as a traumatic memory, an event that, of course, resembles or reminds them of the original traumatic event, Again, we refer to abuse, so all forms of abuse, dysfunctionality, issues of origin, so that could be stemming from childhood, so attachment issues, the way someone has been conditioned or socialized. So maybe a person who's observed how their father treats their mother in a positive way or in a negative way, that can be traumatic. And of course, I would also add to the abuse, there is that sexual exploitation, molestation, pornography, all of that. So it's a big bag, a big, big catch bag, yeah.
Yeah, and it sounds to me that it's personal, right? It depends on the
It
person and how they
is.
go through. And so if a person's watching and they've been through traumatic experiences, they need to look at those in detail because it could be different
right.
things, right?
Yeah,
and
and
they could
sometimes
be relieving the trauma. Sorry.
You're reliving it. Yeah, you said it. And ignoring it and sweeping it under the carpet.
Why? How do I know someone's sweeping it under the carpet?
Ooh, classic avoidance. Changing the subject. Looking at psychosomatic symptoms or reactions. Squirmy, restless, turning away from you or looking somewhere else. So there's little things that you can observe. I would call them cues, trauma cues
That's so interesting.
or signs.
So let's say someone is experiencing this re-traumatic symptoms. How they can move from being traumatized, not dealing with it, to start coping with it.
Yes. I would say it's a journey. So traumatic healing or trauma healing is a journey. Recovery from trauma is, I would say, a lifelong experience. I think that you don't arrive, but you do heal better and stronger. It's like breaking a bone. Like, for example, when we talk about someone who has trauma, I remember actually I broke a bone and I had to see a orthopedic surgeon. Oftentimes, they would be referred to as traumatologists. Now, in the psychological world, you have those who specialize in trauma. And in fact, that happens to be my background as a trauma specialist, so to speak, but I'm still always learning and growing. And then, of course, from the medical perspective, you have a traumatologist. So those who are orthopedic surgeons, they set bones, they help people. So I remember breaking this bone, and I went to this trauma. He says, "Oh, you have some trauma to this area of your bone and your leg, and it's been traumatized and it's broken." So what did I have to do? Well, they had to stabilize the joint. They had to put a cast on it, right? They said, okay, don't overstrain it or repeat or have a recurring experience. And I thought of it from a medical perspective, and it's very similar to a psychological perspective. Sometimes, not sometimes, but in many cases, you must stabilize that area that's been traumatized. You got to not recur or repeat that same action because you could re-injure it, just like re-traumatizing someone. So there's a lot of similarities, and I actually take that as an example of how someone can cope and be able to recognize triggers. Now, how do you recognize triggers? Well, of course, if something reminds you, in terms of you have a flood of memories, you would have, of course, recognition. And then, of course, all of these things can bring in that traumatic memory again, right? And then, trauma has a way of leaving a psychological scar on the canvas of our mind, so to speak. So there are people who have trauma that has been embedded or ingrained over a period of time. And so someone might seem normal, but under the traumatic circumstances or conditions, it can precipitate that trauma. And that trauma can actually not only be relived, as you said, but it actually can be exacerbated.
That's really interesting. It's really important to look beyond the surface in that case.
Certainly.
We need to take a break, but we'll be right back. And we're taking a break right now, but please don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
In a Canada facing uncertainty,
We believe there's more to life.
from mental health to faith journeys,
From finding purpose to discovering love's perspective.
Hope Channel Canada brings light to life's deepest questions.
Because there's more to your story.
Hope Channel Canada, there's more to life.
Visit hopetv.ca.
Welcome back to Beyond the Surface. I'm happy to be here with Dr. Daniel Saugh, a professor at Burma University, right? You haven't mentioned in this episode yet.
Yes, I'm honored to serve at Burma University in the Department of Psychology.
That's awesome. So we're talking about trauma today. Are there different types of trauma?
Yeah, there are probably three essential or major categories. Firstly, you have acute trauma. So acute trauma is, of course, short-term or short-lived. We made a reference to it earlier in our conversation exchange, for example, that car accident. So that would be considered acute trauma. And so it's anything that is short but happens, in a moment, right? Without warning. Then you have, of course, secondly, you have chronic trauma. So trauma that has been repeated over a period of time. And an example of that would be domestic violence. So a woman or a man who's experiencing interpersonal or interpartner violence, right? IPV. So that's a huge thing. So that's chronic. So it's over time and it's wearing someone down. It's burdening them. It's affecting their quality of life. And then last but not least, we have complex trauma. And that's like the onion with many of the layers. So complex trauma is trauma over a period of time, multiple layers of trauma, interpersonal trauma, intergenerational trauma, some of which, of course, are the Indigenous peoples of Canada have experienced, and other, of course, outside of Canada, we refer to them as Indigenous or Natives or Aboriginals, but in Canada, Indigenous, and there's a lot of complex trauma there.
That's very interesting. And there's specific signs of trauma?
Yeah, so there's certain signs of trauma. So you do have the four main categories. So you have the physical symptoms or signs. So of course you're going to see, somatic reactions. So someone might again experience anxiety, depression. They might even have a sense of withdrawal, right? So you're going to see physical symptoms. They might lose their appetite, right? Because they're experiencing this traumatic memory. And so it's causing them to change many things. So then you have the emotional aspect. So you know what? The emotions kind of get out of control. They may not be able to self-regulate their emotions, right? So they'll see something, witness something, and they'll react. They could shout. They can do something like take an action, right? Because there's that emotional responsiveness. And then, of course, you have the cognitive symptoms. So someone's thinking might not be clear. It might be fuzzy. It might be hazy. They might have a freeze moment where they can't think straight because the trauma has so disrupted their logical flow, right? So they might be doing things, but they're not thinking carefully, and they might spill something, right? Or they might drop something. And of course, lastly, you have the behavioral symptoms. And the behavioral symptoms has to do with actions. So again, with certain behaviors, activities. So someone might stop, exercising. They might go binge eating or start their, go to their comfort foods, which we all do. But trauma can exacerbate that and, cause that to spiral out of control.
People with trauma experiences, do they tend to go for drugs, alcohol, things like that? Is there?
That's a good question. In terms of an outlet, coping mechanisms, there's healthy and unhealthy coping. So with respect to unhealthy coping, people will turn to what we call self-inflicting or self-deprecating behaviors, and alcohol is one of them. So they might self-medicate, self-deprecate, and those can be anything from overeating to any abuse of something. Could be a substance, could be food, addictive behaviors. They could go to watching movies. They could be, experiencing any type of destructive or damaging activity or behavior. So certainly, and then the healthy side of it is that, okay, and we'll come to that in a moment, but getting help and realizing that I have something that I need to deal with and I need to get help beyond myself.
That's interesting. And what do you say about effects of trauma? Is there anything to speak to that?
Yeah, effects of trauma is a big one, right? So when we talk about effects of trauma, you talk about the first, I call them hits. So about three hits here that I just want to share. One is mental health, right? So your mental health in terms of being healthy, stable, having what we call a positive mental health, that can easily go south with trauma. And in fact, if the trauma is not addressed, it can actually become embedded, and it could actually lead to the development or onset of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. I had the privilege of serving in the military and also with police, and I discovered that many people who did not address the trauma, it actually escalated and it actually resulted in post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, there's different types of traumas, and in terms of this type of trauma, PTSD is where there are visible symptoms where people can be affected. It disrupts their personality, their work performance, their ability to stay focused and concentrate, and a whole host of other things. Now, those are the visible symptoms. You have another side called invisible symptoms, and there's another type of psychological based trauma called moral injury, but we don't have time. That's another session all by itself, but that's just to touch on that piece for sure. So those are some very deep effects of trauma. And I would say it affects relationships as well. Number two, relationships are not the same, right? So relationships can suffer. Someone might not be communicating or nurturing a relationship, or they might get cold or withdrawn. So that can affect a relationship between a husband and wife, a partner, with children, with the work relationships, and with community and church. And thirdly, I would say it would another effect, and I say last but not least, would be the daily effect. So routine, so someone's daily life is disrupted significantly. They feel down, depressed, possibly anxious. They don't want to go back to work. They don't want to achieve something, or they might be doing something and they completely stop in the middle of it. So it's very, shall we say, handicapping.
And thank you for enlightening us in this different aspects of trauma I didn't know, and they're really helpful to understand. We're going to take a moment to invite our friends Mike and Pam to share their insights into trauma. So I want to invite you, please, Mike and Pam, please share your thoughts on trauma for us today.
Experiences that are overwhelming, post-traumatic stress disorder. And yet I find I have trouble with the word disorder. It is post-traumatic stress to something catastrophic, emotionally, psychologically, and at times physically, that has happened to you. You're not broken, you're not defective, but you are simply reacting to an experience that you've had that has caused great trauma to your heart.
That's right. And that trauma can result in severe depression. And part of that's because you've had a brain injury because of the trauma. All trauma results in a brain injury, actually. Right. And so if you're going through a depression because of the environment, the things that have happened to you, that's just natural. It's normal. Again, it doesn't mean that you're broken. It doesn't mean that you're defective. Now, here's the thing that I've noticed with a lot of people who are depressed. They feel guilty about being depressed.
Right.
If I was a better Christian, I wouldn't be depressed. If I were a stronger person, I wouldn't be depressed. If I had better mental health, I wouldn't be depressed. So the guilt and shame complicates the experience of depression. And all of that's absolutely unnecessary. The truth is that it doesn't matter how strong you are emotionally or how strong a Christian you may be, you can still be depressed. When you look at the lives of the Old Testament prophets, these were men primarily who were very close to God. They spoke God's word when it came to them. They wrote it down. We read them today. We think of it as inspired. Most of them spent half their lives depressed. When you read their writings, they were very depressed, and it was environmentally caused. God's judgment or God's people were rebelling against him, and bad things were happening. The poor were being abused, children were being neglected, widows were being mistreated. Of course they were depressed when they looked at that and the suffering. Some of them were persecuted themselves, and so they became depressed. Does that mean that they were weak spiritually? Does it mean that they didn't have a close enough relationship with God? All that's nonsense. It's absolutely utter nonsense. So the truth is that we all get depressed. It's unlikely that you're going to make it through your life without at least some experience of depression at some point in your life. And it may be accompanied by a loss and grief or other issues, but depression is a normal part of life. So if you're going through that, don't complicate the experience with guilt or with shame. Those are unnecessary. Guilt has a purpose, but not here. Not here, because you didn't do anything wrong. The depression that you have is a normal part of living in a broken world. Take care of yourself. Be gentle with yourself. Get counseling, get support, get help, get medication if you need it, and don't feel guilty about that. You're going to make it through. Just trust. Trust the process, trust your God, and trust some professionals who will help you through it as well.
Thank you so much, Mike and Pam Tucker. I love to hear your thoughts in our shows. So I'm here with Dr. Saugh. We have some final moments. I would love to hear your final thoughts on the topic today.
Thank you. Trauma is complex, as we discussed and shared, and there's no easy solution or fix to trauma or a traumatic experience. Recovery takes time. It might be for an interval of time. It might be a lifetime for some people. However, there is hope because someone can heal from trauma. There is a recently emerging field of traumatic studies, and this new term and concept is called PTG, post-traumatic growth. We often see this in nature. Have you ever seen maybe you've been, and I know I've been to the tropics or the Caribbean or any tropical place, and you see these trees, they're palm trees, some have coconuts, one of my favorite drinks, and when a storm is coming, a strong wind or a tornado, and they bend, and they look like they're gonna snap, but they don't break, they rebound. There is something we're going to talk about next time in another episode, but just to let you know that they experience when there is a broken branch, you'll see that a new branch comes out, or from the ground, if a tree or plant is uprooted, if there's a seed or leaf, somehow after the storm you see growth taking place. Sometimes they even break through the wood or even the crack of concrete or asphalt. That's post-traumatic growth, and that's very important. So there is healing and there's hope for those who are traumatized. And if I may share a spiritual scriptural reference, there's a powerful verse, if I may read it, found in Philippians chapter 4, verse 6, and it tells us this: do not be anxious or worried about anything, but in everything and in every circumstance and situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, continue to let your requests be known to God. In other words, finding and making meaning out of a traumatic experience that will lead to discovering a new purpose and direction for someone's life is one of the best ways to take the negative and turn it into a positive.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for wrapping us up in such a inspiring and hopeful thought. And I want to invite you back, if possible, to come back and talk about trauma and resilience on a future episode.
It would be an honor.
Thank you so much, Dr.
You're very
Saugh.
welcome.
And thank you so much for joining us on Beyond the Surface. I really hope to see you next time.